Okay. Thank you all for coming. Our next guest I'm very happy to have here is Joe Strike, who will be talking about the history of the furry fandom. And I should mention that I ran into Joe in American cons, and I was very interested because he had written at the time one whole book called Furry Nation, which goes all the way back, I think not only to when you started becoming involved in the furry fandom, but all the way back to early stuff. And then you've been involved since 1988, so you can talk about a lot of the early stuff. I don't think that I have anything to add that Joe won't be able to say himself, so I will just leave it to him.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'll just say, I have to run out, don't take it personally.
No, in fact, I prefer you to tell you the truth. Hey, everybody. Okay, by the way, I left some cards here if anybody wants to get in touch with me later on. So anyway, yesterday I did about an hour about anthropomorphism, and that's always been part of the human consciousness. Going back to the very first piece of art ever discovered, 50,000 years old, was of a lion man. Somebody sculpted a human being, but with a lion head. And so it goes that far back, and I talked about Egyptian gods, I talked about Indian gods, all of whom were anthropomorphic. But today I'm just going to focus on, okay, that looks good. I'm going to focus on furry itself, where furry came from, how it was born, etc. So let's see, I'm going to get started. Jack thought I should not read from the script. He thought I should sort of improv it. So I might just use the script as a little guide here. Anyway, oh, that's wonderful. How do we do that? Jack, come back. Oh, there we go. I think we got it now. Okay. No, there we go.
You can use this mic
What?
and I'll give you another mic.
Okay. Let's see. We're going to choose your mic. Okay.
So you can speak in this one and this one if you want to walk
Oh,
around.
I see. Okay, so later on we'll do that. Yeah, hopefully I'll talk fast enough so if people have questions and stuff, you can shoot them at me. So anyway, furry, if you believe it or not, furry came out of comic books about funny animals. Before, comics were like nothing but superheroes, even before there were graphic novels. There were all varieties of comics. There were superheroes, but there were also romance comics, war comics, sci-fi comics, and funny animal comics, which were like, it says, funny animals. They were like anthropomorphic cartoon characters that, I'm going to look at my notes here. Yeah, they were in a lot of comics, all of which are gone now. And they were, oh, come on. There we go, okay. I don't know what the hell is going on here, gremlins. And these were a lot of fun. I used to read these when I was a kid. I go that far back, but they've all vanished. I think it's because that nowadays kids can see all the cartoons they want on TV. They don't have to go to the comic book store. Back then, comic books were 10 cents, and it was like pocket money. Now, if you want to go to get a comic, you have to spend $3 or $4 or $5. So it's also economically not the same thing. And yeah, so there's these guys. There are a whole bunch of these that nobody remembers anymore. None of these characters are forgotten, but back in the day, Foxy Fagin, Dizzy Dog, Willie Weasel, they were into alliteration, and so many others. Now, you had also these guys, everybody knows these guys, and like I said, they took over TV. They had comics back then, again, 10 cents. Oh, that one went up to 30. That price is going up already. So basically, all the cartoon characters moved to TV, and what we're left with are the superheroes and such. And here's some more examples of those long gone comics. You can see there's something they have in common in terms of the title. And you can see these are really cute. They're really charming. The one in the middle, that's actually a double spread cover. It goes onto the back cover of the comic. I love how dainty the alligator is walking, that little tiny umbrella. The monkey is like shocked that the little critter there caught a big fish, and the monkey came home with like maybe a little guppy or something. Yeah, these are really charming. I wish they were still around. So I'll go on from that. Oh, hey, guess what? We're back here. How about that? Okay, let's see where we go from there. Okay, so yeah, like I said, they became extinct. Now you can watch all the funny animals you want in the cartoons. Okay, and what goes on next? So anyway, they were fans of those old comics, and they wanted to see those kind of stories continue. So they started drawing their own stuff. They started just coming up with their own comic book characters. And gradually you had this kind of nucleus forming back before the internet also. That's how far back I go as well. People would get together maybe at sci-fi clubs or at comic book conventions, and they would trade addresses. Again, there was no email, no internet. And they would communicate by paper, basically, by letters or by mass-produced copies, Xerox copies they would send out to people. And this started turning into a thing. Okay, hang on a second. Yeah, we're back here. Now, these people I was talking about, the fans of these funny animal comics, enough of them got together and they decided to put out their own fanzine. And that fanzine was called Voody, which is too complicated to explain where that name came from, but you can see in the subtitle, the APA of Funny Animal Fandom. So the funny animals are existing via the people who are fans of it and wanted to work in those kind of stories again. I'll show you a bit of the overall cover here. So you can see No Humans Allowed. That's a chimp version of Mr. Spock. You get that gag. And this ran for about 38 issues. It was put together by an editor. People would send in their submissions, and it was all kind of on the fly. And again, it was on paper as well as being on the fly. And this lasted for about 38 issues, but a lot of people who worked on it went on to create a new fanzine called Rowbrazzle. And I was in this for a good number of issues. I started like 24 and went up to 100 and something before I just couldn't keep up with contributing stuff to it. So let's see now where I'm going here, since Jack insists I don't read my script. Okay, hang on a second. Okay. And let's see now, after Rowbrazzle, I'm supposed to talk more and just put that slide up while I'm talking about other stuff, but I won't talk about it. Instead, I will talk about one of the people who was doing these comics, these self-made comics about funny animals, and is a very important guy in the birth of the furry community. His name was Steve Galacci. And he was working on a comic that was not about, it was about animals, anthro-animals, but it was not about funny animals. He was working on a science fiction epic about this character in the middle. His name's Irma. And it was very serious stuff. It had a lot of drama, had a lot of pathos, a lot of emotion to it. And he had a background in technical drawing. So did I skip that one there? Yeah, let's go back one. Yeah, he had a background in technical drawing, so he was able to do scenes like this. That's Irma herself. And here's some more of his technical work. You can see how he really got into that style there. And eventually these were published. He became very popular in this nascent thing that eventually grew into furry fandom. And so they would have, let me just see if I can jump around a little more. These people would go to science fiction conventions because there weren't any furry conventions yet, but the people who were fans of this stuff, they would get together like in a hotel room after the day's events at the convention were over, and they would share their artwork, and they would talk about the stuff they liked, the influences, cartoons, whatever. And Steve would be there. People loved his stuff. He became very popular. People kept telling him that he should publish his stuff, which he eventually did as Albedo Anthropomorphics. And you can see right off the bat, this is not funny animal stuff. So where do we go from there? Again, I'm supposed to say stuff from my script while this stuff is up there. Okay, so anyway, let's see. There's a number of influences that came together to create furry fandom, and one of them was anime. Anime had a lot of anthro characters, and it had its own fan following back before it became a thing. Back then it was only a little group of people who were aware of it, and they would get together like at screenings, and that's where I met a lot of furs way back when, because the furs would come and they weren't watching the anime, they were in the back showing off their homemade comics, their fanzines and stuff. And so anime was one of the influences that led to furry fandom. I don't know if anybody recognizes that lion cub on the left. That's Kimba the white lion, yeah, okay. And a lot of people think that Disney borrowed a lot of that to do Star Wars. Lion King, excuse me, wrong genre, wrong intellectual property. So let me see now. I think, yeah, here we go. Even The Simpsons commented on how a lot of people think Disney borrowed a little too much from Kimba. And let me see if this is going to work now, okay? I don't know if the audio is going to come out of this thing, so.
You've made an old
You see, it's not
jazz
working.
hand.
This is from a
You
Simpsons
must have-
episode where he's talking to the ghost of the jazz player she loves, and he's also talking to, oh, come on again, come on. Okay,
You've made an old
so he's
jazz
also
hand.
talking to,
You must avenge
he's,
my
you
death,
must avenge my
Kimba.
death, Kimba. I mean Simba. So, and there's, it was James Earl Jones, so it's also a little salute to James Earl Jones. So anyway, that outgrowth, I was talking about people getting together and watching animation, watching anime, and it led to this outfit called the Cartoon Fantasy Organization. And I would go to those screenings too. They met once a month in New York City. There's chapters all over the country, but the one in New York City met in the basement of a church. And I would met, some of the early furries just like myself. Okay, I'm going to go back to my script. Don't tell Jack, okay? Okay, so the sci-fi conventions, we had the Irma Fellner, catching up here. Okay, anime, okay. A Simpsons clip, okay, the logo, here we go. So anyway, you had all these different groups, the anime fans, the funny animal fans, science fiction fans, but they all had a common interest in anthro-animal characters. And that just led to the next thing on my next slide, which is, let's see now. Okay, yeah, my personal definition. Oh, so they became furries, and it's really a mystery who coined the word furry to describe us. I tried tracking it down, my first book in Furry Nation, and I got to two guys, each of whom said the other guy first described the thing as furries. So the actual true story of that is probably lost to the fans of time. Okay, anyway, I'll tell you my personal definition of furry is anyone with a deep appreciation or identification with anthropomorphic animals. Does that kind of sound like it, describes it pretty well? So let's see, so these parties these room parties became more and more crowded until these two guys, they're going to be in the next slide here. The next slide here. Okay, on the right, that's on the left, Rod O'Reilly, on the left, that's Mark Merlino. These two guys, Prancing Skilled Hair was sort of a communal furry house in Southern California, just below LA. They decided to have the very first actual furry convention, and this was in 1988, and it was Conference Zero. And this is the program book. It's maybe about 8 pages long, and this led to what we have now with Anthrocon had like 17,000 people this past summer, and furry groups. It's interesting that furry, for a lot of people, became synonymous with fursuits, and only about, at least from the conventions, from furry conventions, only about a quarter of the people there wore fursuits. The rest of the people just wore, tails or furry T-shirt or whatever. And let's see, but back at that first convention, there was only a single fursuiter, and this is a bambioid, an outer space deer, and that back then I thought, furry is just about us cartoonists. Why is somebody sneaking in wearing an animal suit? But that just kept growing and growing until you got to the point where now at the conventions you have thousands of people in the fursuits, and there is my suit. That is a Komodo dragon named Komos, and he's a very sinister guy. So if you meet him, watch out. He's also got hypnotic eyes that glow and he can put you in a trance very easily. So let's see. Okay, doing this research for my books, find out there conferences all over the planet. Every time I talk to somebody, I learn that there's a half dozen furry cons in Poland, a million other countries, and it's just astonishing. And I think that everybody has a furry gene to one degree or another. And furries, we people, are the people who just feel that on a really deep personal level. And we're the people who just came together and almost spontaneously created furry fandom. So let's see where we go from there. Yeah, you go all over the world, and I understand this was your convention. So don't know how many people went to it, but evidently it's the official Dutch furry convention. Oh, hang on a sec. Oop. And I'm supposed to talk more about stuff until I get to my next slide, which is furry conventions all over the world. This is sort of a map of the countries they appear in, and it's spreading. This is probably a couple years old already. If I got to the new one, there'd probably be a lot more color on that map. Excuse me. So, the only problem is that furry started out, people looked at it kind of weird. It had a kind of a creepy thing. It had a cringe factor. And early on, this is the kind of coverage we were getting in the media. This is a magazine from 2001, and it's a real attack on the furry thing. They found the most extreme people they could interview, and the author had this really condescending attitude towards the subject. Really, really made me angry. And if that wasn't bad enough, in 2003, by the way, this is, I think you can tell, this is like an American perspective. Furry started in America. I'm American. I know it's spread around the world, and there's other influences, but I can't really speak to them. Anyway, in terms of America, in terms of our reputation, this was really a killer. The CSI episode, this is from 2003, and people still talk about this. We furries still talk about, what an attack this was, and a lot of people who saw it still think of furries as this kind of kinky scene. They find a murder, somebody's murdered inside a fursuit, and the LA furry community, these producers went to the furries and they got their cooperation, they wanted to do it accurate, et cetera, and then they put on this total botch of a thing, and all the furries in LA felt totally betrayed, is what I'm trying to say. And so, yeah, and no, I'm coming down the wire already. That's nice. So anyway, Anthrocon in Pittsburgh, we had 17,000 people, almost 18,000 people this past summer. And our fursuit parade goes out into the streets of Pittsburgh. And they added recently a block party, because Pittsburgh loves us. People bring their kids downtown to have them pictures taken with the fursuiters. And it's so great to go to a city where we are so embraced. They hang Anthrocon posters from the lampposts. And it's just the #1 convention as far as I'm concerned. Okay, let me see. Jumping ahead here. And let's see now. Yep. Yeah, that's so 65 people. I don't know if I mentioned that that conference 65 people, 18,000 at Anthrocon, 17,000 at Midwest Fur Fest in Chicago, which is like maybe the second biggest furry convention. Smaller ones all over the world, small convention, maybe 2,000, 3,000 people. And if you folks are interested in going to convention, I suggest going to a smaller one first, unless you want to dive into the deep end and go to one of the mega conventions. Pittsburgh, Chicago, and people come from all over the world to these things. I'm constantly talking to people. 2 furries showed up from Australia. They came all the way from Australia to go to the big Atlanta convention with Furry Weekend Atlanta. And let's see now, I'm thinking about to wrap it up here. Okay, online is also super active. Websites, social media, people communicate via the internet, role play, et cetera, because a lot of people just can't get to a convention. It's too far away, or they don't have the finances. But so that is a huge part of why a furry is growing like crazy. And let's see now, I'm about to wrap it up here by talking about this, and I think then I fade to black. And I say that's the end of my presentation. So I went through that pretty quickly, and I'll be glad to do a Q&A if anybody has anything they'd like to ask me or have a comment or whatever. Microphone's up for grabs. Can you pass that up to that fellow? Too lazy. Oh, and then there's somebody else. That microphone can stay up there for a while. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, shoot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question what you think about when, for example, the big media companies like, for example, Disney incorporate just really a lot of anthropomorphic animals in their media. For example, you have Nick Wilde of Zootopia and such.
Yeah, 1 second, I want to close this because there's a lot of chatter coming in. I think there's a motor here. How do I close that? Up there?
Oh, so closing already.
Never mind. I'll just talk louder than they do. So, again, the question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what do you think about the very big media companies like, for example, Pokemon has a lot of very anthropomorphized almost Pokemon, and also Disney with Zootopia, for example, or older animations like Bolt or The old Robin Hood, where Robin Hood was a fox. Those things.
Okay. Well, I'll say cartoons, like I said, funny animals moved from the comic books into the cartoons. And animals have always been used to caricature people way back when, including, and as technology evolved, and you had comic strips, newspaper comic strips, and yes, animation. Now, you mentioned, so I don't know, I don't think Disney is, well, I'll tell you this, Robin Hood created a lot of furries, a lot of kids, I guess, who were in that kind of teenage years or preteens. They fell in love with Robin Hood, and so many of those kids became furries as a result of that. One of them was the director of Zootopia, Byron Howard. And he talked about Robin Hood was such an influence on him when he was a kid, and that is a dead giveaway for someone being a furry. And he obviously put that love into Zootopia. And I remember the teaser trailer for Zootopia, before the actual trailer was produced, they had Nick coming on. First he was naked, and the narrator describes how they wear clothes, et cetera, et cetera. And then he pitches Zootopia coming up and says, "It's nothing like you've ever seen before." So that's another big fat wink at us. And it's funny, I was writing for an animation website, and I got to interview the directors, and I asked them about the furry connection, and they kind of shrugged it off. The publicity woman from Disney immediately got on the phone to my editor at the website and said, "Why are you bringing this up?" And they wanted to get our money, but they didn't want to acknowledge that they were, speaking to us. They want us to do it on the sly. But I think nowadays, a lot of that has changed. I'll just change the subject for a second about the animation industry. Back, I guess, in the 80s or whatever, it was still early on, a woman who did furry art went to an animation studio, and when they saw her stuff, I don't know if she had some adult stuff in there, but they didn't want anything to do with her, and she went on a tear that all the dirty cartoons, comics had to leave furry, go to some other website. That did not happen. Yeah, back then, Alt Fan Furry was the big website. People communicated with each other because now it was the beginning of the online age. So she was not successful in purging furry of the adult aspects of it. And now I think, so if you mentioned furry, or if you're in animation business, you didn't talk about being a furry, but now it's like a generation later, and you have furry clubs and colleges and stuff. So I suspect that if you're a furry, you don't have much of a problem, and you have the talent, you don't have much of a problem getting into the animation biz as you might have had, say, 20 years ago. So I don't know if you have covers it, or anything else you want to get in there. Otherwise, yeah, pass it on to the next person. You gotta wait for it to come back down. Okay, after this fellow, we'll bring it back down to this person. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned something about everybody having a furry in them.
Yeah.
And I was watching a little bit of the fandom film that was also shown here, and there was a part in which a boy saw Robin Hood for the first time, and he that sort of triggered the whole furry thing. And I'm wondering, is there a bit of a furry spectrum? Like, is everybody in it, and what are sort of the implications of, like? It seems to be very deep in the identity. I'm sorry.
In terms of like the degree of their furriness.
Yeah, or something about, like, is it how intrinsic is the furry done to humanity in a way?
Well, like I said, I think everybody has that furry gene to one degree or another. Like, people like Bugs Bunny, or they like cartoons. They have a favorite, cartoon character or a stuffed bear from when they were kids. And for most people, that's as deep as it goes. But let me ask the $24 question. How many people here were into anthro stuff before they discovered furry fandom? Show of hands, please. Yep, that's the story. And we're the people who had that gene, much stronger degree. We just instinctively had that identification, whatever. I mean, I was drawing my own funny animals since I was a kid. I wanted to escape into that world. I wanted to be a Looney Tune, and some people think I am a living Looney Tune. But when we people started discovering each other, and we started spreading the word, then people, as we got bigger, as more news came out about us, stories like somebody is into werewolves, and he goes online, wants to find out about werewolves, and he finds furry. somebody else, they're into Lion King, they're looking for Lion King fans, they find furry, and they tell their friends, and it just keeps growing and growing, and now we have hundreds of thousands of furries around the world. I never dreamed, because I am an OG, as they say. Yeah, I'll tell you my story how furry discovered me. I did not discover furry. 1988, I get this invitation in the mail to to something called a furry party. Like I mentioned before, at a sci-fi convention. Somehow my name got on the good mailing list, so they sent out invitations to everybody on this list. I think it might have been I had a subscription to a Centaur fanzine, and they probably borrowed that mailing list. And I opened this thing up, a furry party, and I instantly knew what it was. Nobody had to explain furry to me because I was already there. You know, I was already in Furry Nation. I talk about putting black electrical tape on the bottom of my socks. It's like, oh, I have paws. Nobody knows I have paws on my feet. And I discovered I have a community. I have you people, we have each other, and we're all, I don't know if outcast is the right word, but we're all definitely not mainstream people. We all kind of have this, the gene, the bug, and that sets us apart, and I think mostly in a good way. I mean, furry is great. There is so much compassion and love and support for people in furry that they don't get elsewhere, especially if they're outside of the mainstream or on the spectrum or whatever. You have a home in furry because we understand you and we're like you. And then, you know, all the, then now the meetups at the furry conventions, all the rabbit fans, all the dragon fans will get together and compare notes or artwork or their favorite things. And it's an organic thing, and it just keeps growing because it reaches more people. And I think there are some people who, you know, they learn about it from their friends, or they come across it, and, oh, this is pretty cool. I think I want to check this out, and they become furries too. But essentially, my number I pulled out of my hat, I'd say 95% of furries, because you saw the show of hands here, had that gene, had that pre-existing interest in anthropomorphics, and that's why you have furry nowadays. So. Yeah, you wanted to ask somebody down? Yeah, could somebody?
Can I?
You'll have to be the last one.
Okay.
Oh, you see, the time goes by so quick. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm right here. Why don't you just?
Thank you. So those trends, where are they going? What is the future?
The future, I think, is more conventions. I think there's tons of stuff online. I think there'll be more of that. There'll be more fursuiting. Where I'd like to see it go, but this is way off in the future, there's a lot of people go trans and they have what they call gender reassignment surgery. Someday I hope there'll be species reassignment surgery. And I think we'll all line up for that one. Okay? Jack, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It's always a pleasure.